Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday. How's everybody today? Did you miss me? Had a little bit of life happen yesterday, but tickety-boo today. Just saying. Want to talk about the exchange of the prisoners that happened, that massive undertaking. So anyway, Trump says he would have gotten the political prisoners home for nothing. There was nobody taken while he was in office because Putin wouldn't do that to him. And in May, he said he was the only one anywhere that could get Evan Gershkovich free. Said that in May, by the way, this past May, 2024. Get Evan Gershkovich free. I'm glad Biden decided against giving him intel briefings. Because all through his bluster, all through the Joe had to pass the torch, Joe was incompetent, Joe doesn't have a clue, Joe was working behind the scenes with at least 6 to 8 other countries to get the largest prisoner swap in decades done. Joe and Kamala were the ones that organized this with all the other contacts that Joe had in NATO to get 26 hostages. There was 2 children, so they say 24, but there was 2 small children that ended up going, were freed and went to Russia. I think they were spies. Joe and Kamala spent months on phone calls with these other countries, coordinating and getting the logistics just perfect to make the impossible possible. Joe and Kamala made history. They didn't bury it. The Mango Moose Knuckle, I'm going to say what he said, and then I'm going to add my little shit in between. Just saying. Mango Moose Knuckle said, are we releasing murderers? Well, remember when he said, when they were interviewing him before he was elected, what, you think we don't kill people? Remember that conversation? He was talking about Putin being a thug and a murderer. Yeah, so he said, are we releasing murderers and thugs? Just curious, he says, because we never make good deals at anything. Side note, guess expanding NATO didn't count. Well, it won't to him because he's going to get rid of it if he's elected, so let's not let that happen. Or, in my opinion, a free trade agreement that was a piece of shit. But especially for prisoner swaps, he said. I got back many hostages. Side note, Trump 57, Biden 70 plus, because I think there's more in the works right now, and gave the opposing country nothing and never any cash. Well, except that one time when he gave over $2 million to his boyfriend in North Korea, Kim Jong-un, because they sent Otto Warmbier back in a coma from being tortured. The poor guy died like days later after he would come home. But he said it was for medical expenses. Really? Did Trump pay the families the rest of their medical expenses while he had to be tended to in an ICU and critical care unit? Did they? Did he pay that? Nobody gave $2 million to Kim Jong-un. He says, and he gave the opposing country nothing because he says to do that sets a bad precedent for the future. That's the way it should be for this situation, or it will get worse and worse and worse because he knows everything. Just want to say, you're wrong, bucko. Your administration did at least 4 big gigunda prisoner exchanges where he approved the release of prisoners that were in United States prisons in exchange for foreign governments releasing Americans. So don't say it was for nothing, Donnie boy. Jake Sullivan drove that point home where he said no money and no sanctions have been loosened on the opposing countries. None. John Kirby kicked back at Trump as well, saying that Paul Whelan and Trevor Reed were both imprisoned under Trump's watch, but he didn't bother getting them back. If it was so easy, they were all in Russia, and him and his buddy Putin, it could have got that done, right? Or he didn't. What was he waiting for? Well, here's Trump's record. In 2019, he exchanged a Princeton University PhD student detained since 2016 for an Iranian scientist that tried to smuggle biological material from the United States to Iran. And he said, yeah, we're very happy to have our hostages back. And it was a one-on-one swap. Not quite. I'm thinking the biological material was medical-grade uranium for radiation, for chemo patients, stuff like that, and cancer patients. That's what I'm thinking. Now, his DOJ, because they want to talk about Biden's DOJ, but the folks he appointed dropped the charges against the scientist and 2 co-defendants. So it wasn't one-on-one. It was 3-for-1. Ooh. 2019, 3 high-ranking Taliban prisoners were released for 2 professors, an American, Kevin King, and an Australian, Timothy Weeks. They were abducted in 2016. Now, I know people are going to say the people that were really captured in 2016, why didn't Biden get them out? Because it was 2016. He wasn't even allowed to nominate a Supreme Court judge because he was a lame duck president. So there wasn't quite enough time to get the logistics and the phone calls and the negotiations going before he was out of office. So that's for 2 of them already that were arrested and detained in 2016 in countries. But anyway, I digress. Trump and the president of Afghanistan made it clear that it was all because of Trump. He's such a thirsty bitch. God almighty. The 2020, the Trump administration secured the release of a Navy vet, Michael White, who had been in prison since 2018. Well, at least he got one out while he was in there. That was captured while he was in there. So he could free an American-Iranian doctor who violated U.S. sanctions against Iran. Trump wrote, "Thank you, Iran. It shows a deal is possible." Now, you remember he canceled the Iran deal, right? So them stealing medical-grade uranium and stuff like that and sending back scientists and stuff is just going to increase their capabilities to make a bomb, right? Because he canceled the trade agreement with Iran that they wouldn't be able to build nukes. Not so much anymore. They're almost there. Getting back to this now. 2020. Exchange for Iranian-backed Houthis. Trump exchanged 2 Americans, an aid worker, Sandra Lawley, and businessman Mikhail Gadada, in exchange for 200 Houthi militants who were imprisoned in Oman and were allowed to return to Yemen. Scene of the crime. Yeah. February 29, 2020, in Doha, Qatar, Trump administration, dumbass Pompeo, and I believe Kushner was in on this, but the Trump administration in the peace talks with the Taliban, the Afghan government was not in the loop, agreed to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners in exchange for 1,000 prisoners from the other side. Now, Trump's Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said the deal was historic. Well, of course it was, because by the time they were finally all released in September of 2020, the election was November, by the time the last 400 were released, the 4,600 that were released months down the road were already training and recruiting more people so they could take over. So the last 400 were released. The Afghan government was not consulted, and those Taliban that were all released September 2020 started to formulate a plan to take over the country. And I believe the last phone call to the Afghan government that was trying to get a little more democratic over there, women were starting to drive cars, they didn't have to wear burqas and stuff like that, was January 17th. Don't quote me, but that number sticks in my head for some reason. But Trump made a deal for the U.S. retreat on May 1st, 2020. knowing full well that Biden would be so screwed. So it took a couple of months of negotiations to get an extension before the time was up. The Taliban had gained huge numbers and moved quickly to the larger states from the north and worked their way down. And excuse me, ousted governments like just like they were leading lemons off a cliff. Excuse me. Now, the loss of life for Afghan government folks was massive. Hundreds were murdered. And on the last days, Kabul looked like Saigon all over again. And that's how Trump's going to negotiate with Putin to get abducted Ukrainian kids back to their parents. That's how he's going to act. He will give Putin Ukraine and say, see, I can negotiate a deal. War's over. Because him and Putin are like this. It might be like this, but they're definitely like this. They are in thick as thieves, literally, the two of them. The official findings on the killings, because I have to mention those 13 U.S. soldiers that were killed that day at the airport at Abbey Gate. The official findings finally came out on that on April 15th, 2024, and they reaffirmed the military's findings because there was stuff about the Brits were firing and everything was so confusing, and there was a couple other countries firing and stuff. No, it was a suicide bomber that killed 13 Americans and over 170 civilians just trying to get out of that country before the worst possibly happened. All of this is on the Mango Moose Knuckle. 2,459 Americans were killed in Afghanistan and over 20,769 wounded from the Republican War. I call it the Republican War. Started under Bush and 8 years of it, and then 8 years under Obama as well. The final findings came out April 15, 2024. The war in Afghanistan, in my opinion, should never have happened because it was based on a lie. Well, that's me for now. I think I have another one coming too. Something to do with the Olympics and transgender participant. Anyway, 9-9 loves you. Be good, be safe, and please be good to you first so you can look after somebody else. Mwah. If you're new, subscribe. Give us a like. You're already here. If you stayed this long, just tap that little thumbs up, and I'll talk to you a little later. I love you so much. And thank you for all my new subscribers. Almost at 20,000.